What is going on, guys? Welcome back. Commentary for you. I want to thank my sponsor, Steel Supplements. Link and discount code down in the description. You also know I've talked about the affiliation I have with Harlem Bling. Tell you what, I have seen you guys go in droves over to the Harlem Bling website and get yourself an incredible piece of jewelry that I hope you love. I've mentioned the Cuban I have. I'm sure you've seen the pre-rolls at some point on YouTube of my guy Eddie telling you it'll pass the diamond tester, showing all the jewelry. But once you have a piece on, once you're out, people see absolutely a chain that lights up like nothing else. You're going to have people take notice. I can't wait to get out to the Orioles, get some games in, and see how those chains look in the sun, and see how many people compliment me on wearing it. I know if you get one, you are going to have the same exact problem. Speaking of Orioles, you guys should know, if you follow my channel, do a lot of TTMing with sports cards, have a lot of baseball returns, and obviously I've been an Orioles season ticket holder for some time now because, a lot of gaming correlates to loving a sport. MLB The Show has been one of my favorite games to play the last number of years. The reason is, unlike Madden, it had not been very stale, very repetitive, and for the most part, you got a lot of realism from the game. It very much simulated the sport of baseball. However, much like Madden, even though it has a very good engine, they are starting to get a little long in the tooth. The game is starting to get very repetitive. The games don't feel like they're being separated, and it's not to say they haven't tried. They did a little bit of a facelift on presentation last year. They've worked around a little bit and how you get the ball back into the infield, but at the same time, I feel like there's a couple things that really need to happen for me to enjoy the game this year, and the first of which is going to come down to rules. It's bigger bases. Now, they implemented the bigger bases 2 years back. San Diego said they couldn't put them in the game because it would break the logic, and I understand that. If you're thinking about animations and players running, players standing, players having to catch and protect, a bigger base would cause a lot of things that need to be adjusted. But that said, I feel like they've had ample time to do this, and I feel like one of the things that they need to do is kind of revamp the stealing system. We don't really have a variety in sliding animations, and that really doesn't help players that are fast. So even if you go into Diamond Dynasty, you look at Ricky Henderson, one of the greatest stealers in all the game. He doesn't have a different stealing animation. He just has the same one. And I feel like if they could get those animations kind of hashed out, where your slower players are slow into the bag, where they are slow to touch, and that allows the catcher a little bit more time to throw them out, you have that risk reward. Versus where if you have a faster player, like being an Orioles fan, maybe Jorge Mateo, maybe Cedric Mullins, you're going to be not only more confident in your steal, you're going to have a higher probability because you know you're going to get that specific player-based stealing animation to help you get the bag. Now, to me, that's not all that big of a deal. Should be relatively easy to do, and it would work hand in hand with both your Diamond Dynasty and your every other game mode, no matter what you're playing. Now, the second one, pitch clock. Now, I know this might not seem like a huge deal, but again, this is a rule in Major League Baseball, and they need to have their games simulate the sport accordingly. Now, I think also what they should do is kind of refine their pitch mechanics, because there's really no risk reward, right? I think right now, when you look at throwing motions and releases, a lot of them are very timed out the same, right? There's a little bit of a slower motion, but at the same time, I think what we need to see is that strategy of, do I put in a player that throws fast but has a slow motion, or do I put in a player that has a great slider but has a faster release? Whatever the case may be, that to me is what's important when I'm talking about strategy in my sports games, because if you have that timer set and you don't time it right to get the ball out, I think the penalty needs to be putting the ball slower and more toward the strike zone. That way, all of a sudden, now we're starting to think about not just the pitcher we're putting in, but why we're putting this pitcher in. And to that point, since we're talking about it, strikes, the strike zone, I truly feel like one of the most overlooked aspects in this game is the umpires. Listen, they don't have to be the worst umps in the world, but I feel like when you watch Major League Baseball, you know there's certain umpires that have an expanded zone, that have a higher zone, a lower zone, whatever the case may be. And I feel like we kind of need to get to the point where the game is replicating specific crews, right, that don't cheat you, okay? I'm not asking to be cheated. I'm not asking to have somebody blind out there like Angel Hernandez. What I'm asking for is when I get a certain crew, I know, hey, the strike zone's going to be a little higher. It's going to be a little bit lower, going to be more inside. That way, now the game doesn't feel as repetitive because as I go from ump crew to ump crew, I have to learn what their tendencies are. I have to learn my strike zone a little bit more, and it makes the games feel a little bit less repetitive. And of course, I think that kind of works into what we were just talking about. You're going to have to present those umpires to me in the pregame, kind of the way you've been doing it now, just in a more meaningful way. I think we really need to expand the regional presentation. I'm not going to sit here and say that you need to go out and get every local announcer, every local broadcast voice, get specific people to be on the dugout or the sidelines, however you want to go about it, to do kind of the pregame and postgame reporting. But I feel like we do need something a little bit more, right? It was very nice to get kind of the pre-roll of your local network. It's very nice to kind of get the box score and the presentation side of it, but it just needs to take that additional step, right? Because to me, what I'm looking at right now, when we talk about it, again, gets very, very repetitive. Maybe even give us the option, if we're going to play another team, to let us watch that team's broadcast. I think they kind of worked that in a little bit if you were kind of tricky with how you motion things around. But listen, if I'm sitting there playing as the Orioles, right, and I'm watching the Orioles regional broadcast every single game, I should be able to go to the New York broadcast. I should be able to go to the Seattle broadcast and see a totally different presentation. Likewise, those players on those teams should be able to go to Baltimore and see a little bit different of a presentation, not just the same exact thing with the names kind of being flipped around with who the greats are. And then finally, let's do a little bit more when it comes to pitchers, especially when we're talking about closers, because a lot of times closers do have an entrance. Sometimes they have a little bit more grand of an entrance, like Felix Bautista, who unfortunately won't be pitching this year, but came out to Omar's whistle. I think they need to work a little bit of that in the game. Obviously, you don't need to go get player specific, but let's get a little bit more in terms of just, here's the standardized cutscene of the person coming out of the bullpen, and then here's your warm-up, right? There needs to be some type of amplification of, hey, here's one of the best closers in the game coming in. Because, listen, if I've got one of the best players in Major League Baseball on my team, no matter what the position, I should see something that signifies that. So when you have a great closer, you should see something. Also, listen, when you're playing against those teams, maybe you're not keeping track of the stats the way you normally would if it was a real Major League Baseball season. You kind of get lost in terms of looking, unless you're kind of keeping an eye on the All-Star voting, of the great achievements or the great players as you go 2 to 3 years down the road. It would be great for them to specify, hey, here's a pitcher that's only been in the league a year or two. It's basically a generic pitcher, but it's going to be one of the best closers in the game. That way, as a player, I recognize, hey, this is one of the premier players in the game I'm getting to go against. I get a little bit of a presentation to go with it, and then all of a sudden, I'm re-immersed in the game with just a handful of slight changes to what they've done to really kind of bring the game back in and make you want to play from one game to the next and not feel like it's the same experience every time. Love to know your thoughts on this. Appreciate you watching it. You know I will be back in the week with more commentary.